Am I the asshole for letting my nephew go into foster care? I, 30F, have an older brother, 35M. Let's call Tom. We have never been close as siblings. Growing up, he was constantly abusive. As we grew up, Tom became an addict and his behavior continued to worsen. Since he was 15, the only time he has ever been sober for more than 6 months was when our dad put him in rehab when Tom was 25. Our dad did this to get Tom back into his daughter's life after he abandoned her when she was 3 and fled across the country. When Tom first left rehab, our dad sent him to live with me, pleading for my aid since I was close to my niece and the responsible one in the family. I was reluctant, but allowed it after what I believed to be a sincere apology for past behavior from Tom. Within 8 months, he relapsed twice, and no one in our family would intervene to help. During this time, my now husband moved in with me to act as a buffer of protection from Tom. Ultimately, I was attacked by an addict that Tom had invited into my house before disappearing to shack up with a girl. Afterwards, our family finally condemned his behavior, but none of them would help to protect my niece, whom Tom now had for weekend visits. Eventually, Tom was arrested during one of his weekends. Afterwards, my niece's mother moved several hours away and cut contact. I haven't been able to see my niece since then. Tom has never apologized for any of this. As for Tom, within 3 months his new girlfriend was pregnant and they were married. They had a son who was almost removed from their custody upon his birth. At the time, our family pressured me to take custody of my nephew so he wouldn't be taken. I wasn't financially stable, had just married, and was struggling with my disability. I was in no position to take in an infant. I also knew the first time Tom got sober for even a month, he and his wife would be on my doorstep demanding their child. Furthermore, my husband is staunchly against any involvement with Tom. It's been a few years since then. Tom and his wife have had continued run-ins with family services. Through it all, I've been NC. I've met my nephew in passing and I've always been friendly, but since I'm NC with Tom, he doesn't know me. He's 5 now. This past year, Tom developed a worsening seizure disorder that has gone untreated due to his inability to remain sober. In the last month, he's been to the hospital at least once a week. His wife has also been declared unfit by family services, and she is not to be unattended with their son. Last week, our dad called to say they suspect Tom will soon die. They're trying to make arrangements, including assigning someone to raise his son. Apparently, I'm their best option. Tom and our dad said that I would need to step up immediately to form a relationship with my nephew, and that my cruelty towards him would no longer be tolerated. I told them no. Now everyone in my immediate family is sending me harassing messages that I'm heartless, because family looks out for family. Am I the asshole? Not the asshole, and I hope you don't let your family manipulate you into taking on a child that is not your responsibility. You tried to help once and nobody had your back. They shouldn't expect you to try to help again. This isn't your cross to bear and you owe them nothing. Not the asshole, no. Yes, the poor kid is likely to be in the foster system for the rest of his life if you don't take him in. It sucks. But this is Tom and his GF's problem. You two have chosen not to have a kid and your husband wants nothing to do with Tom. That's just the way it is. Not the asshole. Your dad can take him if he's so bothered, but clearly he doesn't want to upset his own life but expects you to. How about no? Or how about Tom's wife sorts herself out so she's not an unfit parent? Not the asshole. Stick to your decision. You parents are not some corporate manager of your life that they can simply assign you to care for a child. Also, they say that family takes care of family and that should be true. However, how were they taking care of you when they insisted you take an addict into your home? Maybe it's time they step up and take care of family themselves. They won't be the first grandparents to raise a wayward child's baby. It'll give them the opportunity to make up for the obviously miserable job they did with their son. As for their statements and family harassments, while they are not tolerating your cruelty, you can avoid tolerating fools and go NC with the lot of them until they mature. Or simply reply, tolerate this. You are not obligated to take the child. If you don't think you can care for the child, then please don't be pressured into taking him. If you're saying no only because of his dad, that's not fair to the child. His dad won't be around. Do not make any decisions based on what your family is telling you. Talk to the social worker. Your family has their own motives. You don't know what is really happening. Has the child previously been removed? Where did he go? Does he have a relationship with other caregivers? Am I the asshole for punishing my son for aiding in our nephew's lies? I, 29M. Am the father of 3 kids, 10M, 4M and 2M, with my wife, 29F. My older sister, Claire, 33F, has 3 sons as well, 13M, 10M, and 5M, with a 4th son due next month. My oldest son, Adrian, and my sister's middle son, Edwin, are in the same class together. They just started the 5th grade last week. Adrian and Edwin have always been pretty close to each other as they share the same interests, and my older sister and our younger brother see each other all the time. His 2 daughters are not school age yet though. Edwin and Adrian can be challenging kids, especially Edwin. Both of them are into pretty niche anime, stuff like Pokémon and gaming, etc. They both have trouble accepting some kids aren't into their interests and got in trouble last year for that. They also both got in trouble for homophobic and sexist comments, which we are still working on with Adrian, and it's been a struggle. Claire's oldest son, Blaze, is a sweet kid, but he has a very rocky relationship with Adrian and Edwin, and he just normally watches baseball videos by himself when the family hangs out if he isn't at practice or with his friends. On Friday, my wife and I got a call from Adrian and Edwin's teacher, telling us she was concerned about stuff the boys were saying. She said Edwin was saying Blaze was getting in trouble with the law and other concerning stuff about him. He also said his dad worked at Nintendo and said I worked for Tesla and that Adrian was going along with it and helping him elaborate on these stories. She was concerned as she had Blaze and remembered him as a sweet kid. I told her everything was made up and she then told me some other stories they were saying and it was just lie after lie. I talked to Adrian about it after he got home and he told me his teacher was lying and continued to make excuses. I told my son that until he told the truth, he would lose video game access, but he insisted he was telling the truth. My wife was at a party for work when he came home, so I waited for her to come home again to confront him. But when I talked to her she told me Claire was telling her what happened according to Edwin and both had a detailed story about the teacher not liking them and lying about them and it seemed to match up. I then asked one of my coworkers about this and told him to ask his son who's also in the same class. His son told him Edwin and Adrian were full of crossing p, and that the teacher was telling the truth. After this, I took my son's devices, and even let him save the game he was playing. But he started crying claiming I was being too hard on him and when I asked my wife and sister about this, they seemed to agree. I'm conflicted. I love Adrian and just want what's best for him, and I'm worried that maybe I did go too far but Adrian and Edwin are sticking to their seemingly debunked stories. Am I the asshole? They are lying to their teacher about family, and lying to their family about their teacher. If you don't set things right now, what will they grow up to become? Not the asshole. And what's even more troubling than the lying is that both your wife and your sister are refusing to hold the boys responsible for their actions with reasonable consequences. It may be time for you to request a classroom change so that they don't have easy access to each other to support the other in lying. A 10-year-old does not get to comment on the severity of his punishment. Your wife and sister, however, are babying 2 boys who are going to grow into monsters unless this behavior is nipped in the bud immediately. I would work on figuring out who's the bad influence between the 2 of them. One is instigating the lies and the other is following along. You may not like it, but it could be your son and not your nephew. Not the asshole. He needs to learn actions have consequences and maybe needs to relearn the story of the boy who cried wolf. I'd also suggest the cousins have limited interactions and maybe should be in separate classes at school as they seem to be bad influences on each other. Better to nip it in the bud now than when he's 17. Not the asshole. There are consequences for actions. Your kid was making up lies and behaving poorly, so his device should be taken away, if that's standard punishment. You and your wife need to have a united front with the kids. Always. And your sister needs to worry about her own kids and not how you deal with your own. Am I the asshole for telling my 29 female husband, 34 male, not to call his ex-wife his wife? So my husband, Daniel for privacy, and I have been married for just under a year and I love him very much. He has an 8-year-old daughter, Jane for privacy, from his previous marriage who I love as my own. He's always been respectful and patient, which is part of why I decided to marry him. We met right before the pandemic when he had been recently widowed the year before, so we tried to take things slow. We ended up quarantining together and after 3 years we decided to tie the knot. The wedding ceremony was everything a girl could dream of and we've honestly had very few issues in our first year as a couple. It wasn't until we went to pick up Jane from her summer camp that I started seeing an issue. I went to meet up with him at the front desk. I found him chatting with the camp coordinator, which is all well and good until I overheard what he was saying. He mentioned that, "My wife made me this jacket actually, she was really good at all that sewing stuff." He was referring to his ex-wife, Alyssa, for privacy, not me. It bugged me a little, but I brushed it off as a one-time thing, an accident. We don't talk about Alyssa much unless we're around Jane, and even then he usually refers to her as Jane's mom. I never heard him call her his wife, especially now that we were married. It wasn't until a week or two later that I learned he does this a lot. We were at a get-together with some friends from work, my first time meeting them. It was all good until one of them asked me questions about baseball. I admitted I didn't know much about the sport, and he said that was weird because Daniel had mentioned I was really good at the game and even played some in college. It left me very confused. After talking to some more guys, I found out this was a common issue. A lot of them thought Alyssa and I were the same person because Dan called us both his wife. At this point I got really offended. We had been married for 10 months and he didn't even call Alyssa his ex-wife yet. I was super awkward, and explaining to people that he still called his ex-wife his wife was utterly humiliating. Especially the amount he does it, not just one or two people but the whole office. When we got home we fought. He said he didn't even think about it that way, that since he never divorced Alyssa he never stopped thinking about her as his wife. He still stands by the fact that Alyssa is his wife, despite how embarrassing it is to explain to people that I'm not his second wife but rather his new wife and Alyssa his ex. I told him that if he wasn't ready to move on then he shouldn't have married me. If he can't commit to being my husband then he shouldn't get to call me his wife. I spent the next night at my sister's house ignoring his calls. We recently started to smooth things over by not talking about them, but I can tell that this is going to be a sore spot in the marriage I am trying so desperately to save. You are the asshole. She's not his ex. He is her widower. There is a whole world of difference between a marriage that ends in divorce, and a marriage that ends in the death of one of the partners. If you can't cope with the fact that he can love both you and his late wife, then you shouldn't have married him. You are completely at fault here. She is his late wife, not his ex-wife. Not the asshole may be the right term as late wife, but I don't think you're an asshole for wanting to be differentiated from his dead wife. You said you had to explain to the whole office, which frankly sounds like a lot of people. Honestly, to me it sounds like your husband needs some counseling. From what it sounds like, he is talking like his first wife never died and he is only talking about her. Is he even talking about you to his coworkers? Not the asshole, he can refer to her as his late wife instead of ex, but it's not okay to not differentiate between the two of you around others. It doesn't mean you are jealous, it simply means you want to be recognized as you. Am I the asshole for not wanting to give up my man cave? My wife and I have a 4-month-old and will be trying for a second baby soon. We have a 3-bedroom house and one of the rooms is my man cave, aka all the crap my wife doesn't want strewn about. Last night she said when the second baby is born we'll need to have the man cave converted into baby room number 2, and my things will need to be put in storage until we can buy a bigger home, which realistically won't be for another 5+ years. I told her I don't think that's necessary and fully expected our babies would share a bedroom, and once they're a little older we would be ready to move to a bigger home where they could have their own rooms. She thinks I'm being unrealistic and selfish. Kids share bedrooms all the time, but I do see her point. My family is my number one priority, but at the end of the day I also need a space for myself. My wife doesn't want my collection of records, tapes, books and video games in the living room or our bedroom, so the only alternative is to put everything away in storage elsewhere. Am I being a selfish asshole for expecting that our toddlers would share a bedroom for a few years just so I can keep my room? Edit. No, my wife does not necessarily have her own room, but has the whole house to do with as she pleases, while I try to keep all of my things contained to this one space. Edit number 2. In defense of my wife not wanting all my stuff around the house, I totally understand and respect it. It's both our house, and she prefers things to be tidy and sparse, while I like clutter and have a lot of shit. As some commenters have pointed out, she doesn't want my records, books etc. displayed in the living room or bedroom and would prefer these things go in storage, hence the issue. As for the babies, our 4-month-old sleeps peacefully through the night, and has done so since she was about 6 weeks old, and a newborn would sleep in our bedroom with us until they're also sleeping through the night before we would have them sharing a room together. I agree that an infant's waking up a toddler isn't fair, and envisioned this only beginning once both children are sleeping through the night. I'd like to also add that this wasn't an argument between my wife and I. This was a calm conversation between the two of us, and at no point did I ever say I refused to give up my man cave. Relationships are about honest and open communication, and if you can't do so without it devolving into an argument, you don't have a very healthy relationship. Ultimately, I admit to being selfish here and would like to find a compromise that everyone can be happy with, whether it be my records and such being stored neatly on shelves in a shared living space, or our children comfortably sleeping in the same room. If ever our toddler or my wife found the situation to be unbearable, I would give up the room in a heartbeat. You are the asshole if you can't have an adult conversation that doesn't start with, "I won't give up my space." Info. Where's your wife's private space? Info. Does wife have a private space just for her use? Don't try for a baby before at least a year after birth. I am so done with people trying for babies again before the kids are even half a year old. So when the baby wakes up the toddler, repeatedly, every night, are you going to deal with 2 crying kids, or will that be your wife's problem? How about the next day? Who will be taking care of 2 sleep-deprived babies in bad moods every day?